back, viewers at home. We are having a conversation that is quite fruitful, interesting, and I'm so looking forward to it. Now, conversations with my brother creates a safe as well as supportive environment for men to discuss their experiences, emotions, and struggles in a way that promotes healthy masculinity, brotherhood, and self-discovery. Now, the founder is joining us tonight, Ofentse Makonya, who holds regular events with the panel discussions and talks that are tailored to the specific needs of men at different stages of their lives, allowing them to share insight, learn from each other, and find answers to the questions that they are grappling with. Ofentse, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Conversations with my brother. I'm loving the title itself because it's very welcoming, it's very casual, and it's not so, like, intimidating.
Yeah.
Can you tell me at what point in your life and where were you to now come up with such a very beautiful idea of establishing such an organization?
So, the name Conversations with My Brother actually comes from my relationship with my brother. So, the heart of the organization really came from the first man that I ever loved, which was my brother. And I realized that as I was growing and becoming a young woman, and he was growing to become a young man, and he was about like 4 years older than me, I realized that there's ways in which life supported me and helped me grow into this woman that I am.
Yeah.
But it seemed to me that he didn't have access to those same communities. Women are able to make friendship and find sisterhood in ways that are almost instantaneous. But it seems that the same doesn't necessarily exist for men. And so as I watched my life and I watched his life, it really dawned on me that this wasn't necessarily a specific thing to either one of us. It really was the difference between how women experience life and sisterhood versus men and brotherhood.
Now, just looking at the current times where we're looking at how how men are perceived, and I think as a woman, if you were to say, but man, it's a thing of, okay, are you a patriarchy princess? The titles are already,
Absolutely.
there.
Yeah.
For me, how do you, like, I'm just curious to know how or what parts of you do you leverage to sort of create that bridging gap as you hear from what men have to say versus how you then relate it to the other females who are willing to listen to some of the issues that you experience through the panels that you host for them.
I think it's a very valid point that you bring up around there's not necessarily permission for us to show up for men. As soon as you start to speak up for men, or you're a patriarchy princess, or you're championing men, and I'm quite unapologetic about it, because I think to think that we can have a society where in every space men exist, in families there are men, at workplaces there are men, in marriages and friendships there are men. So what's this understanding that we must be pro-women and anti-men? If you're pro-humanity, you'd be pro for both. So I don't take issue to people naming me a thing. That's okay.
Wow, I actually love it for you because I think it then allows you or makes you exist in such a space without you feeling so conflicted at that. And I think my other question now is through these conversations, without jeopardizing the confidentiality of the spaces for women, for the men watching, because they'll be like, I don't want to go there. Next thing, Offense is going to be telling my side of things. But I want to find out from you, what were some of the issues that were brought to the table, and to you it was quite eye-opening that you felt like, oh wow, okay.
So we schedule our panel discussions across specific generations.
Okay.
So we have a panel discussion that's specific to sons. So that's a specific age group that's like 30 to under. And then we have 30 and 50, which we call our brothers. And then we have our fathers that are 50 and above. And so in a single event, you have 3 different panel discussions. And so the point of it really is to highlight the fact that while all of these are men, the experience and the journey of manhood looks different. How you feel and what you need at 18 and 25 is different from what you need at 45 and sometimes even at 65. So, it's not even a matter of jeopardizing confidentiality in as much as it's sharing that it's a spectrum. And I think sometimes because we assume that men are simple and women are complex, we don't even make space to understand that it's an entire spectrum. The journey is varied. Yeah.
And is there an issue that you feel like it's something that being in a Women's Month we all need to sort of be aware of and partake in as a humanity aspect in addressing, because ultimately it comes back to bite us as a society.
I think with it being Women's Month, I think it's an opportune time for women to ask ourselves that as we continue to advocate for spaces where women are free and women are safe and women are welcome and celebrated, in what ways are we also advocates for men? And it need not be men specifically, but right now I'm speaking about men. But the question is, as you continue to be liberated, in what ways do you create space for others to be liberated? Because what we don't want is to flip the switch where the person that is now liberated becomes an oppressor in another instance. And so I think it takes having very honest conversations with ourselves as women to think about what are the ideas that we hold of the men in our lives, our fathers, our brothers, our colleagues, our friends. What are our expectations of them? How do we communicate our expectations? You know, a simple thing like, are we as vocal with congratulations and encouragement and support as we are communicating our concerns and our disappointments? I mean, that's one single question, but there's so much to pull from that.
And with that being said, working in a room full of men, or just not even working, because working is quite intimidating because you have to prove yourself as a female, coming from a perspective of female. But in a panel or in a space where it's conversations about men, for men, and being the female founder, what has been the reception of that?
It's a very interesting question. It's very polarized, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Some people are very intrigued and curious, and
Okay.
some just come for that to just be like, wait, it's a female-founded event. How does this work? And then there's some people who are apprehensive and I can almost say untrusting. But I'm not offended by that. I think if we consider that some of the most innovative solutions in our society for challenges seldom come from the places that we think that they will, then you can accommodate the idea that a space that is created for men can be carried by a woman. And I think maybe something I just want to make very clear, that while I'm the founder, the event is entirely men-led. So all of our panelists are male. The only women really in the room would be myself and the women that assist with, you know, our catering and some of the people in the media team. But it completely is about championing and celebrating manhood.
Amazing. And now I have to ask in terms of men navigating the issues around masculinity and gender roles
Yeah.
in that sense. How do we, and I wanted to say how as women do we come in, but I feel like it's either or, it creates that either or
Yeah,
space. But
absolutely.
how do we as humanity come in assisting that journey?
I think it's also just about shifting our frame, right? That we don't, because I don't come from a place of men need help. I'm championing masculinity. I'm celebrating brotherhood. And so I think if we first just begin by shifting the way in which we relate with even the idea of masculinity, and we know online that's such a controversial topic. You can't begin to talk about masculinity without 1,000 people raising their hands to tell you why it's a problem. But before it's a problem, what are the beauties of masculinity? What is amazing about men? What makes men so different but also so special, set apart from women? And I think even saying that sounds revolutionary, because like, how dare you call a man special? But what's this idea that women can exist and be precious, and in that same universe, men exist and be forgettable? You know, I think we think of certain words, like language to me is very important, right?
Yeah.
Because you consider that we'll call women sensitive and men tough. We'll call women complex and men are just simple. And in this language in itself are boxes and prisons. So how about we begin to just change the language that we use and see how much more access we have to grace and love and support when you change even how you interact with the very idea. So I think maybe the first thing is to begin to break those frames and give yourself a chance to experience a man not from the perspective of what you expect from him, but who he is first.
Wow. And now, offensive, this brings me to ask, because I think currently our generation is realizing that a lot that we are and how we behave is not rooted in like a choice that we made, but then it's things that were fed to our subconscious that are now coming to be our reality. And I think with that, I want to ask: are there any specific cultural, if not societal, factors that have contributed to some of the challenges that exist for the men, or just that exist in society?
You know, I think even to call it cultural is almost limiting, right? Because there's so many different pillars and I want to say constraints to a man's ability to express himself fully. Because for some it's cultural, it can be cultural and traditional, cultural, traditional and religious, cultural, traditional, religious and societal. So when you must first break through all these different boxes of what it is that you're expected to be, I think it then becomes hard to do the work of expressing, finding expression in your masculinity. I think that something that for me that's been quite freeing is watching the men in the room experience masculinity from different standpoints, you know, because you're in a room with men of different races, of different socioeconomic backgrounds, of different generations, you know, because age is one thing, but a generation is different, you know, because how our generation thinks might be completely different from generations who were younger than us and to maybe even older. And so to be in this room and to watch the men make the connection that like, oh, okay, I thought this was a me problem. And then a man that's his age says the same thing. Or a man in a panel that is a father's panel says something that sounds the same but slightly different. You begin to see a liberation of, oh, okay, I'm not the problem then. Yeah, and I think for me that's quite empowering.
Now, what would you say to someone who is quite skeptical or so ready to criticize such a space that you have created in terms of where conversations exist and solutions come up in the room from men sitting alongside them? And yeah, what would be your message to them? And it could be a man and it could be a woman in this instance.
I think the question is why? Why? What makes men any less deserving of the opportunity to express themselves fully? What makes them any less important to create spaces that are curated specially for them, you know? Our last event, which was in June, was called Stories Around the Fire. And it was a fireside chat. It was at a lodge, and it was like outside. Everyone was in their K-ways. We had live fires around. We had good music. The food was fantastic. And it really, you know, you underestimate how much it shifts someone's spirit for them to realize that they too are worthy to be held at a certain level. And so then my question to you is to say, when you say, why do it for men? I think my question is, why not?
And I think with that, it makes me now ask you, I think for viewers at home, to understand the bigger picture and the bigger plans
Yeah.
for conversations with my brother. What are your hopes for this organization?
You know, we're championing and we're pioneering a new narrative for manhood. I mean, I'll speak to several events. We have an event that's coming up in September. Next year, we are planning a young boys camp because we realize that some of the conversations that we're having now might be too harsh and heavy, you know, for a 16-year-old to sit in, for a 13-year-old to sit in. But they will get to an age where these conversations matter. So how do we begin to edge them slowly into this journey of manhood? So, you know, the long-term plan is to change it from single events into a movement where the country really begins to shift our understanding of why men matter, and not only that, but what it is that is our responsibility to creating spaces that celebrate them.
Yeah, and how can the larger community play a part? Not because I think in such an event, usually people would want to now be part, but
Yeah.
in their own spaces, how do they contribute to the bigger hope that conversation with my brother has for the many men out there?
I think the point that I'd made earlier, just about sort of questioning yourself around the ideas that you hold around manhood and men, whether you're a woman or a man, right? And just really being honest with yourself around in what ways do you need to transform to be a space that is accommodative of both men and women. Yes, we'll host events and we'll curate spaces and we'll celebrate manhood, but how do you turn a movement into the way in which you carry yourself?
And for the many men who are tuned in tonight
Yeah.
and they probably want to, test the waters
Yeah.
or be part of such a very beautiful community, how do they begin and how do they even connect with the organization itself?
So on all of our social medias, our handle is at convo_WMB. If you'd like to reach out to myself or anyone in the team, that would be at info@conversationsza.org. And, so as far as how to get involved, for one, Conversations with My Brother is a non-profit organization, and it's personally funded by myself.
Okay.
And we have both private and, I want to say, business donors essentially that have sent through funds to say, okay, look, I might not be able to attend, but I'm sending 10 men, or I'm paying for 5 tickets. And so it's that kind of assistance that we need. We also are looking at opening our YouTube page. So if you're an editor, there's so many different parts of ways in which to begin to distribute this movement. So if you're an editor, if you are someone that's in the event space and want to help assist in distributing this platform, you're absolutely welcome to reach out to us.
I don't know if it would be so premature for me to ask, because this is quite a very refreshing approach that your organization is doing, and which makes me wonder in terms of this guest speaker who would be coming in to have these conversations. What is the criteria used to assess, the eligibility of, okay, you're not good enough, but
Yeah.
you're appropriate to speak on this, or you're appropriate to address certain things?
That's a very fair question. I'd say the main one is if you're a man that's doing the work, right? Because I think we also are shifting away from having experts come and sit and say, okay, so these are the 5 steps to being a man. We want the men that you are a father and you are a brother to the people in your community. You're showing up for them. So that when you sit and you speak and you're speaking to your brothers, you're speaking from a place of doing, of having failed and tried again, of consistently challenging yourself to show up as the man that you know you can be. So the eligibility criteria essentially is, are you brave enough to be transparent and share of your life so that other men can pluck a feather from your hat essentially.
Ofentse, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And what would be your parting shot based on our conversation?
My parting shot really is to say, one, if you're a man out there, join us. And if you're not able to, I think begin to create space for yourself to show up in more than what society deems as acceptable. Manhood is a spectrum, and you're allowed to show up anywhere on that.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us and really giving us insight and just a different perspective on how we need to look into some of the spaces that exist, and question why certain spaces are not existing for the men in question. But thank
You're
you
most
so much for
welcome.
joining.
Thank you.
Viewers at home, that was my guest and the founder of Conversations with My Brother, Ofentse Makonya, who was telling us all things what she is doing and through her beautiful work and her team in terms of addressing and helping men address certain issues and challenges that they experience on the daily. But viewers at home, as you heard from her, you know how to connect with her. But for now, let's head over to an ad break. Let's see you after this.